Hello and welcome yet again to this edition of Politics Analysis. Our focus is still on Nigeria. But before we proceed, this is a good time to pause the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. Give our videos a thumbs up and also activate the notification bell so that you get notified of any of our new videos. Now, let's get into it. CATRIONA Laing, the outgoing British High Commissioner, weighs in for the second time at the just concluded presidential election and gubernatorial elections as well. Recall, not too long ago, CATRIONA Laing advised Nigerians to accept their elections despite the flaws, the intimidations, and all that happened within that election period that Nigerians were disgusted about. The British High Commissioner on Punch News was quoted as saying that Nigerians should accept these elections because it was better than the previous elections. However, as you know, the Iron Lady, the person of Aisha Yusufu, gave a response to her, and this is what Aisha Yusufu had to say to CATRIONA Laing.
Yes, indeed, they heard you. You came out to tell us that the 2023 election, you found it fascinating. You found it fascinating that people were killed. You found it fascinating that people were injured, people were harmed. You found it fascinating that results were being changed. You found it fascinating that violence was brought into the election. Well, they've heard you. They've heard you loud and clear. And the gubernatorial election, they unleashed more violence. More people have been killed. More people have been harmed. More people have been disenfranchised. More people have been refused to perform their civic duty. The same thing that you not accept in your own country. You come to our country and you sit down, you're fascinated by an election that is marred with violence because, of course, it's a horror film you can watch live happening. Again and again and again we have stand this double standard, this two-faced standard. We do not one thing. You sit in your pretty little countries, you have election where people are free to go out and vote, where nobody is afraid for their lives, where nobody is killed when they go out for election, and then you come to our own place, you accept a minimum standard. You're okay with, a few being killed because those few are not part of your families. Those few are not your citizens. We do not need handouts from you. We do not need handouts from these nations. You sit down, you constantly want our country to be down. You want our continent to be down so that you say, we sent them £5 million for the election. Taxpayers' money. Do we look like we need £5 million? Does Nigeria look like it needs £5 million? We have said to you, stop giving an enabling environment for people who loot our nation dry and take them to your places and invest them there. There must be minimum standard. We're sitting down here, people are being killed because they want to exercise their civic duty. And you come to tell us that we should be proud of an election that is so mad. Because, it's better than 2019. How? Well, more people have been killed. They heard you loud and clear. Hope you're happy now.
This is the statement that CATRIONA Laing made that got Nigerians angered, according to as published by Punch News. And it says, I read, while fielding questions from journalists after meeting with the Senate President, Laing said despite the contestation over the outcome of the February 25th presidential polls, the process was fascinating and portended bright future for Nigeria. The UK envoy said, I made very good friends. I love Nigerian music a lot. The culture here is so rich. Secondly, the politics in Nigeria is so fascinating. And she ended by saying, I was here till the last election and I finished with this election and I'm impressed with Nigeria's democracy journey. Yes, a bit of a setback, but overall, I see this as positive and Nigeria should be proud with a remarkable difference when I came in 2019. That was what she had to say then. However, on the next video, she appears to have changed her initial position about the elections and done a 360-degree turn. Watch.
It's an interesting times. Of course, I started just before the 2019 election and I finished after 2023. So I've seen some progress, a few setbacks, but overall what I would say, and this is one of my key sort of highlights from my time in Nigeria, Nigeria is the biggest, most important democracy in Africa, and for all its flaws and challenges, you are on that journey, and you should never take that for granted because you're in a region where democracy is backsliding, and indeed globally. But Nigeria sends a bit of a beacon of hope, and I know a lot of people are disappointed with the process and with the outcome, but I would say hang on to that important fundamental that people in Nigeria, your vote does count. Look at the different electoral map. It looks completely different than it did in 2019. Democracy is a journey, it's not an event. We're watching closely, along with other members of the international community, and those who incite violence or indeed act violently could be subject to a visa ban to our country, or we have other instruments, including our human rights legislation. So I can confirm we're gathering information at the moment. We obviously don't speak about individuals, and we will consider whether we want to exercise those visa bans. So that is one of the tools. That's if you like, a negative tool. But the whole point of that is deterrence, to ensure that people reflect before they act in that way, because elections going well are so important for Nigeria. What didn't work well, and it was a big disappointment to all of us, and most importantly to Nigerians, was what INEC had raised expectations, that as the results were being tabled at the local polling unit, they would be automatically visible to all of us, actually, to be able to track the results in real time, so transparently. Clearly the system failed, and there's no question. That was a massive disappointment. It also meant that it created space for people to be concerned that somebody's interfering with the system, somebody's hacked into the system. And I think one of the problems was that INEC didn't communicate quickly enough what the challenges were. And we spoke to the INEC chair about this, and he accepted that point, that they should have been able to communicate soon. But it was a failure, and I think it's been a big setback to INEC's credibility, frankly, and therefore people's confidence. Other sort of challenges and interesting times, of course, I started just before the 2019. So just before sort of stepping back a bit and maybe looking at the lessons from the presidential overall, I think on the positive side, the BVAS itself worked very well. We had a very good briefing from IAGA, who are civil society partners who monitor the election. And they were encouraged that the BVAS worked, if not with at least with not fingerprint, with the eye sort of accreditation. So that's been positive. There was disappointment over the late opening of the polling units. Still, the logistics seem to floor everybody this time. And also this problem with people not necessarily finding their correct polling units, having been reassigned. So there were definitely quite a lot of logistical problems. And then the third big issue, obviously, we're all familiar with the IREV, what went wrong? Why didn't the big expectation everyone had to have full transparency so people could log on and see the results coming in? Clearly didn't happen. There's an investigation going on to understand what went wrong with that. In terms of where we are now, and the announcement that came out yesterday for the postponement, as you know, the court case was lodged by the opposition parties asking to examine all the material on the BVAS. INEC then put in a counter sort of legal challenge to say we actually need time to prepare the BVAS for the gubernatorials. And where we are now, and I just read the INEC statements last night, is that they set out their reasoning for that. They have no problem with the opposition examining the material. It will all be uploaded and available. But they simply do not have time. The court case ruling came too late for them to reconfigure the BVAS. So personally, I think that's the right decision. I think it would have been a mistake to go ahead if they're not prepared. We can't afford to have another election not fulfilling people's expectations. So although it's a huge disappointment, there's a delay, and it's a challenge for all of us. We had our teams ready to go into the field, some already pre-positioned. I think it's better to be prepared and go through with the delay, would be my assessment. Well, Nigeria is facing incredibly tough times. You've got enormous insecurity problems across the whole country. I mean, I've been here nearly 4.5 years, and sadly the security situation has deteriorated very badly, and different kinds of security challenge. The economy is also struggling, and people are really suffering. And I think the recent currency crisis, has really made it incredibly difficult for people. People are losing their livelihoods. Cash-based is still very much a cash-based economy in Nigeria. So we now know, assuming that the president-elect becomes the president, and of course there are some legal challenges going on and they should play their part, but the president-elect will have a very challenging set of time. But a leader is important. A leader sets a vision and inspires their team and their country, but nobody leads alone. He will need a very good team around him. And it's the team collectively at the federal level, and of course all the governors in a federal system as you have, will collectively, hopefully, lead this country through these incredibly challenging times ahead. The context on violence, so because I was here for the last election, so I can compare. So from looking at the data, the pre-election period here was a bit more violent than the last election, and there were quite a number of incidents. But the actual election itself, the day of the election went off relatively peacefully, and certainly more peacefully than 2019. We're now in the post-election period. And I'm encouraged so far that all the party leaders have said very clearly to their supporters that they're disappointed, they're not happy with the results, they're challenging the results, but they're going to do it through the courts, which is exactly the right way to go. And we commend them for making that very clear. So far, we haven't seen a lot of post-election violence. We're still, I'm not resting on my laurels. There's still quite a long way to go. And obviously the gubernatorials are really the next big test of this. And it's very important that all the party leaders emphasise, as we run up to now delayed gubernatorials, that those go ahead peacefully, that people feel they can vote without fear or favour. But so far, I'm encouraged by people recognising the need to do this legally through the courts rather than on the streets. The first on turnout, certainly compared to last time, which was 35%, I think the numbers are coming in, there's a range obviously, but around 28%. And that is a big disappointment. And perhaps a bit of a surprise, because certainly the numbers registering went up considerably, and a large number of those who registered collected their PVCs. So the expectation was there would be higher turnout this time. The second reason may be that now with the BVAS, obviously you cannot vote until you're actually accredited, sort of biometrically. Whereas in the past, frankly, that would have been easier. So it may be that the numbers were inflated before. So we need to look at that. But having said that, those two caveats, nevertheless, it is a disappointment, and the numbers are certainly lower than I was expecting. But we understand it'd be interesting to get a breakdown. A large number of the youth, certainly in places like Lagos, where they felt their vote would count, did mobilise. So there are glimmers of hope around the country. And my message to everyone, including the youth, is don't lose hope. Please go out and vote. These gubernatorials in Nigeria can make even bigger difference than the presidential in many cases. So please don't be discouraged. Go and vote.
The outgoing High Commissioner also has this to say about people that perpetrate violence before and after elections and how the UK plans to respond to them. Watch.
Lying. You have reiterated that the British government has resolved to sanction politicians who incite violence, and that even British politicians, Nigerian British politicians, would not be exempt. This is not the first time this promise has been made. In the last cycle of elections and previous elections, we've had assurances from the British government that this would be part of their support to promoting a violence-free election. I'd like you to share with Nigerians have there been any such sanctions made, and who are some of these people as a deterrent to people who perhaps might want to incite violence?
So again, just to explain the policy on this, and it's no different than in previous elections. I was here for the last election and I made a previous statement, and our ministers did. So our policy is very similar to the Americans, so that we're watching very closely, and if we have evidence to suggest that an individual, who isn't necessarily a politician, by the way, it could be somebody from the security side, it could be an individual citizen, it's not directed specifically at politicians. If anybody has has incited violence or indeed directly participated in violence, we can and will consider using our visa programme to prevent that person travelling to the UK. We also have a new tool in our armoury, which is human rights related sanctions can be placed on an individual. You will see later this morning a statement on the elections from our Development Minister and African Minister Andrew Mitchell, and there'll be a clear statement on this which will be coming out this morning.
Okay, so does that also involve, and I know maybe this might be for also like your American counterparts, does that also involve people in the judiciary? Because there was a story recently that broke about a certain politician saying that, you know, some people in the judiciary were stopped from getting a visa to go into America. So this dragnet, will it also involve people in the judiciary, you know, all sorts of decision taking that can be at an anathema to democracy and the likes? You know, would they also be sanctioned in all of this?
So obviously I can't comment on the specific US case. I'm not going to say who's in and who's out, because the point of this is that it can be applied to anybody who's involved in undermining the democratic process, and in particular those who are inciting violence or conducting violent acts. But it can go wider. Hate speak and so on could be picked up through this. So anybody, any individual in any walk of life who's undermining the democratic process. And just to add, we have used this tool before. I cannot say who this has been directed to for data protection reasons, obviously. But of course, the point, as you mentioned, is for this to be a deterrent. We don't want to use this tool. We want Nigeria's elections to be peaceful. So this is really just an indication that we are watching closely, and we have this tool in our armory should we have to use it.
That we come to the end of this edition of Politics Analysis. Hope you enjoyed the video. Once more, kindly subscribe to the channel, give the videos a thumbs up, and activate the notification bell to get notified of our new videos. Also, if you have a suggestion of videos that you would like us to talk about, feel free to make your suggestions in the comment sections and we could take your advice. Thanks for watching and goodbye.